Let's now bring in Dr. Keitumetse Mashego. She is a clinical and sports psychologist. She joins us now as we look at preparedness for the 2024 Matric Results. We're also looking at healthy ways to deal with the pressure, the anxiety that comes with the outcomes of these results. Dr. Mashego, thank you so much for your time and a very good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, and good afternoon to the listeners. Thank you for having me.
All right. So, outside of this particular court case that now allows the Department of Basic Education to practice what it has been practicing for the past couple of years in terms of releasing the results in newspapers, of course, this time there is some level of discreteness in the numbers of the examination numbers of the students. But it does also come with a lot of anxiety for the students, whether or not they see their names or their identity in the newspaper. What are some of the things that you think during this time, especially, I would imagine a lot of them were also stressed because of this court case. What would your advice be, heading up to those results announcements?
Honestly, for me, the concerns with having such, the inability to control, certain conditions when people see their results in the newspapers, that's what is concerning from a psychological point of view. Ideally, it should be in a controlled space like a school where they get the results, in my view. And if, someone struggles to process their results, then there's support there, offered by professionals to help these students, because there's a high risk, sadly, for them having mental health challenges, but also just develop thinking about taking their lives because of the results. And, errors happen, sadly, in the newspapers because people are omitted. Sometimes, the results are not what they should be, because there's so many of them. So if you're there in the middle of the night and you don't see your name, or you're usually a good math student, and when you see the result, it's a fail because of an error in the paper, which, can happen, which we cannot control, this can lead to a lot of stress for students and can often, lead to them thinking about taking their lives and feeling like failures. And, there's so much peer pressure and societal pressure, sadly, for this, and, when the results come out.
And do you think that we do underestimate that peer pressure? Because a lot of the time people always, dismiss that. But it has proven over the years that it is really a part of, the problem in terms of the pressure. Where do you think that comes from? And of course, how do we deal with that?
As part of the developmental phase of children in high school, that peer pressure is part of the thing they need to learn how to cope with and to overcome. So it's part of the natural development when it comes to children. But sadly, in this case whereby, it can lead to someone thinking about taking their lives, or leading them to have so much anxiety or inability to cope with life because of that peer pressure. So it is part of, development when it comes to, children, all children. And of course, they need to be assisted sometimes professionally to navigate peer pressure, or to be supported by the family or the communities they come from in order to process that. But if there is that silent competition between, the scholars, or that, someone, as I said, could have been a great student, for the past 12 years, and when the results come out and they're not what is expected, this can lead to a lot of distress. And hence, getting these results in the middle of the night somewhere with people, your scholar friends, and not getting the result that you want. And maybe it's an error, as I said. Maybe when you do get that formal results, that it's not what you saw in the paper, because there is those instances that when that happens. But sadly, if someone is already struggling with a lot of anxiety, a lot of distress, and they are grieving the thing that, the result that came out, because they're not what they were expecting, that can cause a lot of distress in these youngsters.
Social media has been just one of those vehicles that has shown just how desensitized South Africans can be. With that in mind, what kind of support structure do these learners and students then need, particularly during this very anxious time?
Ideally, we really need to also, the parental or the caregivers, for these students also need to understand that sometimes what was expected, of the student will not necessarily be the outcome. Therefore, they also need to be aware of how they speak to the student in this time, but also understand, the pressures that the students are under. It's from the exams, but also from, society at large, and even the own families have these, pressures on these students to perform well, understandably so. And the students themselves also have expectations. And you find that, sometimes that we limit ourselves to what can be done post grade 12. Most of the students sometimes just want to get into university. And I think that's the conversation we need to have in Africa, that there is more to life, other than university. There are other options. There are other ways to make a living. And the results that come out at this time do not define you as a human being, as a person, and they don't determine that what you will be as an adult, whether you be successful or not. So we really need to start having that conversation that in as much as these results are important, they do not define, or you cannot necessarily predict what the child's future would be like. There is other ways for them, to do what it is that they can, so that they can make a living and, thrive and become successful in different ways. And we also need to look at, some of the career paths that we, value in the society. We also need to relook that, because people don't want to go to FET colleges, for example. And it is quite sad, because if that is what you are skilled in and can make a living out of it, why not go that route?
When we are in a crisis of sorts, we tend to forget that the only way is through it. And most of the time, people actually don't know, how to get through it. What are some of the practical steps that you can just give our viewers who are watching now, in terms of on D-Day, what are the practical steps that you can actually use to make sure that you get through it?
I'm of view that when they do get the results, it shouldn't just be the student alone or the scholar. Hopefully then someone can support them, someone they talk to, during this, so whatever the outcome of those results. Because sometimes, you find they're alone or with their friends, and the peers obviously cannot handle, when someone is quite distressed. So I'm of view that when they get these results, someone should accompany them, someone who can contain their emotions, help them process, and to, help them see the bigger picture in spite of what the results are. And, we don't know what we don't know. Therefore, sitting here wondering what it is that you got before you actually get the results on Monday, that can also cause a lot of distress. So in the meantime, focus, on what it is you can control, which is, today, this moment, but, do the work to ensure that you're visualizing, the possibilities that it can go well. Because what happens when we're in crisis, we often think that 99% it will be a worst case scenario, but there is a chance that, you might actually do well. There's always an equal chance of it going well and it not going well. So it's really about that perspective, to know that, let me not focus on the worst case scenario. Let me imagine, what will happen if it does go well. And also, I think it's really just about that support, and that the scholars really to have someone to talk to, whatever the outcome, so that they can process, this next step of their lives in the best way possible.